Hello class, this week we're looking at chapter 24, section 2, Europe Faces Revolution. Our objectives this week, we have 4, identify 3 schools of political thought, trace the development of nationalism, describe nationalism in the Balkans, and analyze reform in France and Russia. So first we're looking at our first objective. We're going to be looking at 3 different philosophies that come out. Now, we've already started looking at these philosophies with the French Revolution, the idea of conservative, liberal, and radical. If you remember the Jacobins, they were radicals. And we have the more conservative in the French Revolution, which was the Directory. So looking again at what these 3 philosophies are. So in the 1800s, they sort of emerge out of the Enlightenment as well as the French Revolution. We have conservative. Conservative, they are the nobles, landowners, and they want to keep the traditional monarchies. So anyone who likes the idea of a king and a queen, they are going to be conservative. Liberal, they are sort of on the other end. They're the wealthy merchants, business owners, and they actually want to have a limited democracy. So most of our liberals, they're going to be middle class. Radicals, they believe in liberty, equality, and want everyone to have a vote. So, for example, we know the Jacobins. The Jacobins who took over during the French Revolution, they were the radicals. They were trying to sort of get pure democracy in the country. Nationalism develops. Now, out of these 3 ideas, we start to see the development of this idea of nationalism. Now, nationalism is when one person or a group of people is loyal to each other with a common culture and a common history. Now, often this also includes other elements, so people who speak the same language, people who worship the same religion. This is tied in with nationalism, even if they share the same land. A nation state, this is a nation that has its own independent government. So this is the start of the development of countries. Up until this point, we have empires. We have the French Empire, the Austrian Empire. Well, now we're starting to see the development of individual states who have their own government away from a king or a monarch. Many of these nation states, they have sort of limited, they either have limited democracy or they may have a king, but that king doesn't really have that much power. Some examples of nation states at the time is we have places like France, England, and Spain. So they're the ones who first start to develop this idea of nation states. Now, the people who are sort of behind this idea of nationalism are the same people who are sort of educated in the Enlightenment. These are going to be our liberals and our radicals. Now, remember, our conservatives, they're the ones who want to keep monarchy. Nationalists challenge conservative power. So we're starting to see the rise of nationalism throughout Europe. And these nationalists, these are the liberals and radicals, they're going to challenge these old empires and old monarchies. The first area is we have the Greeks. The Greeks are going to gain independence in the Balkan area. Now, the Balkan area is controlled by the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire is actually a Muslim empire. This is the same sort of extension of Muslim empire that we've discussed before. And in the 1800s, Greece gets a lot of support from the rest of Europe to gain independence from the Turks. And the reason why they're able to gain independence from the Turks is because Greece is known as sort of the foundation of Western Europe. So the rest of Europe supports Greece because of religious reasons. Greece is Christian. They support it because Greece is also the foundation of humanism, the influence of the Renaissance. There's a lot of important Western Europe history in Greece. And so the rest of Europe doesn't necessarily like that Greece has been taken over by the Ottoman Empire. And therefore, they are going to support Greece when Greece tries to gain independence from this empire. In 1930s, we have these uprisings are being crushed all over Europe. So we have a Belgian, Italian, and Polish liberals and nationalists. They all are starting to launch revolts against their traditional monarchies. But many of these uprisings, they do not follow through. So even though all these countries are trying to gain their own independence and become nation states, it does not work. And so in the mid-1830s, we have many of the conservative governments are back in control. Now remember, conservative governments, these are those monarchies. Now in 1848, we have revolutions fail to unite, so we have some more revolutions. Most of these revolutions in 1848 are happening in the Austrian Empire. Now remember, the Austrian Empire is mostly the Habsburg family. So different ethnic uprisings. Now the ethnic uprisings that we're starting to see, these are from countries like Hungary, as well as Prague in what is today the Czech Republic. We also see some uprisings in Vienna, which is one of Austria's main cities. But even though the liberals are able to take hold of power for a short amount of time, eventually the conservatives sort of gain back that power in a year. So even though, again, we have more revolutions in the Austrian Empire, that sort of fail. The conservative monarchy is in place. Radicals change France. So we've discussed a lot about France in the last few weeks because of the French Revolution. Well, it's not finished. We have sort of some more revolting going on later on in the 1800s. So in 1830, we have France's Charles X. He is trying to restore an absolute monarchy in France. Now, remember what they did to their last absolute monarch. Louis XVI was beheaded. So we already know that France is not going to react well to an absolute monarchy. And Charles X fails at this. In 1848, we see Paris ends up going and having another mob to overthrow this monarchy. And they're trying to set up a republic. Now, a republic is sort of a limited democracy. That is when we have elected representatives in the government by the people. So the people elect representatives to sort of control the government. But eventually these radicals, they split in while they're fighting, and we have the moderates take control of the new government. So by 1948, we have a new constitution in France. And this constitution calls for an elected president and a parliament. So what this means is now the leader of France is going to be elected. It is not going to be a monarchy at all. As well, we're going to have a parliament, which means we will have elected representatives from the people who will represent in the government. We do have Louis Napoleon, which is Napoleon's nephew. He actually ends up being the elected president. So if we remember Napoleon, of course we remember Napoleon. Well, now his son ends up being the president of France. But his son follows in Napoleon's footpaths and takes the title of emperor, and he ends up promoting industrialization in France. The reason they elect Louis Napoleon is they know that he is a strong leader like his father was. And at this point, because France is still suffering from some instability, they need a strong leader to help them industrialize and build roads, build infrastructure, new buildings, and stuff like that. Louis Napoleon, he's able to do this. The last country we're looking at today is Russia. Now, Russia has not developed as quickly as a lot of our other empires. In fact, many of the other empires in Europe, they have industrialized. And what this means is that we have the building of roads, canals, we have more technology coming out. This is sort of coming from the scientific revolution, which means we have more products, and many of these European countries are able to, their economy is able to thrive and become better. This does not happen in Russia. So the czars, which is like a king, they end up sort of failing to free serfs because they are in fear of losing landowners support. Now, if we remember what serfs are, these are like servants. We are talking all the way back to Middle Ages. So czars in Russia still have almost a Middle Ages feudalism type government where serfs work on the land for free for the landowners. The czars know that the landowners have a lot of power and aren't really willing to lose that landowner's power. What ends up happening is another thing because of this, because they're still working with agricultural economy and not industrializing, Russia ends up lacking what it needs to have a proper military. So many of the other European countries, they're starting to develop better weapons and better armor to defeat other countries. Russia does not really have the money and the industrialization to do this. So in one war, in the Crimean War, they end up getting defeated. Alexander II, he is one of the czars. He is determined to make some of these social and economic changes. And Alexander II believes that one way of making Russia sort of come into the new age is to free these serfs. So in 1861, he frees all the serfs on the land. But debt keeps them on the same land. So even though he frees the serfs, it doesn't really change the serfs' way of life. And the reason is they owe money to their landowners. The reform also is halted because eventually Alexander II is killed. So he's killed by terrorists in 1881. So while he's trying to bring Russia to become industrialized, we have some of these people who disagree with him and end up killing him for that reason. We have another Alexander III. He also is going to encourage industrialization in Russia. And he's also driven by nationalism. So we do have a few czars who are trying to make changes in Russia, but for the most part, it doesn't really work. You will have 2 questions this week. Your first question is, why might radicals and liberals join together for a nationalist cause? And your second one is going to be about Russia. Here we have Alexander II and Alexander III. So what I would like you to do is, what was the driving force behind Russia's industrial expansion?